Good afternoon. My presentation is going to be on westward expansion. My name is Xavier Belcher, and my YouTube video here is talking about westward expansion and how it's connected with the start of the United States Civil War. Introduction to this. Westward expansion of the United States during the 19th century was a complex and transformative period that not only shaped the nation's geography, but also its political, social, and economic landscapes. This expansion, fueled by the ideology of manifest destiny, played a crucial role in setting the stage for the Civil War. This video is going to dive deeper into the topic using the iceberg format. Now, we're going to talk about the importance of this topic. Westward expansion is how the United States grew to become the geographically large nation it is today. But expansion helped extend the reach of American ideals, but also added to the ever growing issues within the Union at the time of slavery and states' rights. My thesis behind this video is going to be westward expansion should be looked at as a greater cause of the U.S. Civil War because as the country grew, all of its problems did as well. We're going to start off here at the tip of the iceberg. And from that, we're going to start with points talking around the manifest destiny, political tensions, economic factors, and potential conflict with Native Americans. With us going this particularly, for this sake of this video, going to highlight the manifest destiny and the conflict with the Native Americans. By our visual here, we can see how what the United States territory was in 1783. And as time went on, we started to see territory being gained from the Louisiana Purchase, annexation of Texas, and the seceding of land from Mexico. First one we're going to talk about is the Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was the 19th century doctrine that the expansion of the United States across the American continent was both justified and inevitable. This belief was rooted in the idea that Americans were destined by God to spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. The ideology of Manifest Destiny not only encouraged territorial expansion, but also fostered a sense of American exceptionalism. This mindset led to the belief that it was the nation's duty to civilize and democratize the continent, often at the expense of Native American populations and other nations such as Mexico. Next, what we're going to get into is the conflict with Native American communities and tribes. Westward expansion also had devastating effects on Native American populations whose lands were often seized for settlement. The resulting displacement and cultural erasure of Native American communities further complicated the national narrative surrounding expansion and freedom. As the U.S. government pursued its goals of expansion, Native Americans became increasingly marginalized, often found themselves caught in the crossfires of conflicts between settler populations and the federal government, which further complicated the moral landscape of expansionism. Next, we're going to get into just below the surface. As you can see by our visual, this is a picture depicting the Brotherhood and a central battle between the States of the Union and the Confederacy. Points we're going to highlight is how slavery and expansion. The point we're really going to highlight, is how slavery and the expansion of the United States heavily started to influence the ever-growing threat of the Civil War. And we're also going to talk about the political polarization of this. As new territories were acquired and settled, political tensions escalated. With the formation of the Republican Party in the 1850s, which opposed the expansion of slavery, galvanized anti-slavery sentiments in the North and deepened Southern fears of losing political power. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, who ran on a platform of halting the expansion of slavery, was perceived as a direct threat to the Southern way of life. Lincoln's victory without a single Southern electoral vote exemplified the deep political divide within the nation. The culmination of these tensions led to the secession of Southern states following Lincoln's election, ultimately resulting in the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The struggle over the expansion of slavery into the Western territories became a central issue of the conflict. So, another point I want to mention is how the Dred Scott decision also contributed into this as well. And other points, such as the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, doubled the size of the United States and led to an influx of settlers into new territories. The question of whether these new territories would enter the Union as free or slave states became a contentious issue. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 attempted to maintain the balance between free and slave states by admitting Missouri as a slave state, but also Maine as a free state, establishing a line to divide future territories up. Further expansion after the Mexican American War, though, raised questions about slavery. The Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas Nebraska Act sought to address these issues, but ultimately exacerbated tensions between the two. The Kansas Nebraska Act allowed residents of those territories to determine the status of slavery through popular sovereignty, leading to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. The Dred Scott decision, meanwhile, in 1857 ruled that Congress could not prohibit slavery in the territories. This is a ruling coming from the highest court in the land. That should tell you something about the American politics at the time. This effectively nullified the Missouri Compromise, and this ruling also fueled Northern abolitionist movements, sentiments, and increased Southern fears of losing influence over national policies regarding slavery. So you're starting to see the connections here from westward expansion and the start of the Civil War here, getting further and further into my point. Now, there were economic motives for the reason why the United States wanted to expand, though. Westward expansion was driven by economic incentives, such as including the desire for land, resources, and new markets. A discovery of gold in California in 1848 and the subsequent gold rush attracted thousands of settlers, leading to rapid population growth and the establishment of new states. Next up, we're going to move into under the iceberg furthermore, highlighting points such as the cultural divide, the economic disparities, and the historical grievances between the North and the South. First, we're going to talk about the economic disparities between the two groups, and then we're going to get into the cultural divides and historical grievances. While the North increasingly developed an industrial economy, the South remained agrarian and dependent on slave labor for its cotton production. This economic divergence fueled sectional conflicts as the North sought to limit the expansion of slavery into new territories to protect its labor market and economic interests. Cultural differences, though, between the North and South became more pronounced as the population moved westward. The North had a huge emphasis on education, industrialization, and social reform, contrasted sharply with the South's very agrarian, slave dependent economy. This cultural divide contributed to a growing sense of us versus them mentality that permeated American society, which still does permeate to this day, ultimately manifesting in the ideological battles of the U.S. Civil War. So, as we can see based on my graphic here, you can see the differences and the developed divide between the North and the South here. As we're coming to a close, to wrap this up, the westward expansion of the United States during the 19th century was inextricably linked to the causes of the Civil War. You cannot deny the ideological, economic, and political ramifications of expansion fostered deep sectional divides that culminated in a very, very catastrophic conflict between the North and the South, leaving over 1 million Americans dead. The legacy of this expansion continues to shape American society and its understanding of race, territory, and national identity. Understanding this connection is essential for comprehending the complexities of American history and the enduring issues that arose from the Civil War. Throughout this presentation and video, I use a few primary sources, such as to help formulate my script and my conclusion and connect between westward expansion and the start of the Civil War. One of those being an excerpt from the Kansas Nebraska Act in 1854 saying, "The people of each territory shall be allowed to decide for themselves whether or not they will have slavery within their limits." Another excerpt I used was from the Dred Scott decision in 1857 saying, from the Supreme Court saying, "The Constitution recognizes slaves as property and that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional." And then another excerpt I used along the way was from Lincoln's House Divided speech. And I think this speech can still permeate to America's current state. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. Maybe not in the literal sense of us being a slave state now because slavery has long been abolished in the United States, but there is a divide within itself, oftentimes still leading back to the outcome and conclusion of the Civil War. I hope this presentation was very informative and you can see paint together how westward expansion ultimately led to and became a key issue in the fact of why the Civil War was fought. Thank you today, and this concludes my presentation, my video.